has academia flipped from a patriarchy to more of a matriarchy?
Yes, to a degree, I think it has. There are aspects of academia that I think always had a little bit of the matriarch element because it's about teaching young people, which is something that is important to women and men. But it used to be an institution that was run entirely by men and was for men only. Women weren't allowed to get an education. They weren't allowed to get higher education degrees, not PhDs. And the professors were all male too. That has been changing over the past few decades. And now women are the majority at all levels of academia, from undergrad, grad school, and even up through professors. So there's been a pretty radical shift over the past few years. And along with that, we see a lot of shifting norms. So the institution of academia was designed to be a kind of hierarchical meritocracy where, to get into the top schools, you had to perform really well on tests. Then once you're in the school, we're sorting students. These are the good students are getting A's, B's, C's, D's on down. And the same thing happened with professors, where the top people, the most productive people, got jobs at the top institutions. So the whole thing kind of had this meritocratic hierarchical structure. It still has that to a degree. But as women have become more prominent in these institutions and have more power and control over how they operate, we see a lot of female priorities taking hold, a big one being egalitarianism. This is the sort of motivation behind the whole DEI initiative. The word equity is right in there. But we see it in other ways too, like grade inflation is increasing. Average GPAs at colleges have been just skyrocketing, and now virtually everyone's getting A's and maybe a couple of B's, which didn't used to be the case. We have, various concerns about people not feeling included because they're not performing as well as other people, or being offended because we're studying topics that portray certain people in negative ways. And we've gotten more sensitive about those kinds of things. And I think all of that is reflective of female priorities rising to prominence in academia. So yeah.
Good. Yeah. And I want to camp out a little bit on just the numbers game that's going on right
Mm-hmm.
now, because you said at every level, women are, and we could dive down into where this doesn't take place, but overall, you're saying the stats are out there: bachelor level, college level, master's level, PhD level, faculties, jobs. Is it basically every category? Women, there are more women overall when you count degrees.
So yes, when you count degrees, there are more at the undergrad, more at the master's, more at the PhD, at the doctoral level. That's all majority female. Professors only tipped over to majority female a few years ago. I wouldn't say it's majority female at all levels. For example, if you look among full professors, so tenured faculty that have advanced to the level of full professor, that is probably still majority male, but that will flip soon, because that just takes time. And so, because the majority of assistant professors are women, eventually the majority of full professors will be women too. As the older guys retire, which the older guys, the ones that are getting close to retire, they were in academia at a time when maybe it was like 70, 75, 80% male. They're all retiring. Women are coming in at more junior positions, and eventually they'll be majority. And then, of course, you don't see majority women in certain disciplines like computer science and various engineering, also in philosophy. However, numbers have been increasing there too. And I think you can even see like a little bit of the cultural differences in the areas that are more female oriented versus male oriented, where the social sciences, critical studies areas, where women are overrepresented more, they have a little bit more of the feminine culture than areas that are still male dominated, like computer science and physics, where the former are more likely to have like DEI requirements and are more likely to emphasize those as part of their department culture than areas that still have a little bit more of that masculine energy.
Good. And so, I guess my next question, I want to focus on the STEM question, and I will put this in the show notes. But you and Christina Hoff Summers did a fantastic debate at MIT. Is it the Free Speech Alliance or
Yes.
okay? And they host, as you would imagine, different like debates and discussions. And I thought you both did a just tremendous job tackling that STEM question. Why aren't there more women in STEM? And maybe you drill down, and there are a lot of women in STEM. It just when you get to a couple different disciplines,
Mm-hmm.
it tends to differ from like the national average. And so maybe my first question is, what's the story that you tell on the differences there with maybe like the quote unquote hard sciences? And then I want to ask a follow up about what's the story you tell on the lack of, let's say, gender parity in philosophy. So I'll start with
Mm.
STEM and then go over to that.
Yeah, philosophy is an interesting case. But yeah, with STEM, so one of the biggest differences between men and women, and this is observed even if you look among women and men in the top 1% of intelligence or 0.1% of intelligence, super talented people who could do anything they want to do. A difference that you observe there is that men are more interested, this is kind of a simple way of saying it, but men are more interested in things and women are more interested in people. So men are more systematizers. They're interested in the way things work, whereas women care about people. They want to help people. That's what motivates their intellectual interest. So if you look in disciplines like biology or medicine, areas where they're more relevant to people and particularly relevant to helping people, like being doctors, women have flooded into those areas and they're dominating now. And I think they will continue to increasingly in the future. Whereas if you look in the more things oriented STEM areas like engineering, computer science, that are quite removed from people and helping people, at least it's several steps away, women are less interested in pursuing those areas. And so people say we need to be continuing to push women into STEM and like mentor women to get them into these STEM fields. They don't mean STEM. They mean just this handful of areas where they're still underrepresented. But the kind of funny thing about that is, as women have gained freedom, they've chosen where to go. They vote with their feet, and we can see women love to be medical doctors. They don't necessarily want to be engineers, and society considers that some kind of problem in need of fixing. And I think that's kind of going to do a disservice to women because you're pushing women into areas that they have less interest in just because they're not represented there yet. So yeah, that's the big one with like why women are dominant in some sub areas of STEM, and yet now still decades after they've been encouraged and had total freedom, pursue whatever area you're interested in, they still aren't at 50-50 in certain areas, and it's just because they don't have as much interest in those areas for the most part.
Okay, that makes sense. And I'm wondering, so if you could sort of put the opposite hat on, I'm not clear on what it would look like to encourage women to get into those specific disciplines. Like, have you heard of like specific tactics, measures of trying to get more women into something like physics or engineering or something like that?
Well, one thing that we see a lot of are like mentorship programs. So, a lot where they try to pair, say, young women who are talented in STEM, like really good at math, let's say, pair them with a female physics professor as a mentor, and hope that that helps encourage women to get into those areas at higher rates. They are probably successful to a degree. I wonder, without those ongoing efforts, would there be even fewer women in, say, physics? Perhaps, possibly that's true. But you don't have mentorship programs for men to get into those areas. If anything, we're like, we don't talk about men in these areas. We don't need any more. We don't want any more. And they still flood into those areas despite that. So I don't think that's like the biggest thing. I think the mentorship programs, like if there's a woman who's interested in particle physics and she's good at that, she should be encouraged and supported to go into that. That's great. But she shouldn't be like pressured into doing that and away from what, if she has other interests that are more important to her, then I don't know that really trying to, do a hard push to get women into areas that aren't their first choice is necessarily doing women any favors.
Okay, and so that leads me to the philosophy question. And one of the things that I want to consider in this question is, if I understand this correctly, it's something like the women who typically are, let's say, skilled in higher mathematics and physics and those sorts of things. Typically, they're also going to have, uh, high skills, high achievement when it comes to verbal as well,
Mm-hmm.
and so that leads me to think, I'm thinking of philosophy and I'm going, well, philosophy is sort of a marriage of like mathematics, logic, and that sort of thing, and also the verbal. And so I might expect more women, or let's say the same sorts of things that's happening for women in other disciplines besides like the hard sciences to happen in philosophy. So have you come up with a story of maybe why that's not happening?
I've actually thought about philosophy because I think it's sort of an outlier in that it doesn't fit as well with this people things distinction that explains a lot of other areas. The verbal one you bring up is interesting because yeah, that's another explanation for example, women dominating law school. Really smart, really talented, ambitious women who are good in quant and verbal, they're more likely to be well balanced, whereas men are more likely to be tilted toward the quant, which means that men have better options in quant disciplines, whereas women have like equally good options in different areas. And so a lot of them pursue law school. But with philosophy, I I've thought about it. I don't know that I have a great explanation for it. My best guess is that with philosophy, the problem is that it's a bit abstract and it's a bit removed from actual concrete problems. So if you look at, for example, there are studies looking at what motivates men and women to go into scientific disciplines. And men will say more than women relative compared to women that they want to understand the world and explain the world, whereas women are more likely to say, I want to make the world a better place, I want to help people, I want to improve the world. And so philosophy might suffer from its lack of like concrete direct applicability to any real world problems. Like philosophers are all up here and women want to be like out, like creating change. And so I think that's the best explanation I have. Maybe somebody else has a better one.
Yeah, I think that does make sense. It's interesting though. I mean, like philosophy as a discipline is known to be extremely left leaning.
Mm-hmm.
And we could say that for a lot of academia. And I actually don't know how it compares with other academic disciplines, but I do know that it's very left leaning, and
Mm-hmm.
that there's been a lot of energy put into trying to sort of allure women into the discipline.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about your own story because I know that you were at least at one point interested in philosophy. So how did it take a turn? Was it just, look, it's just not all that practical. You can't really get a job, and hey, it's a dead end. Or I won't put words in your mouth, but like, how did that story go for you?
Yeah, so the first, I guess, discipline that actually really interested me was philosophy. I took when I was in high school. I took a class at the college nearby, Akron University. I took philosophy 101 there, and I loved it. And I was like, I'm going to be a philosopher. This is my calling. I was obsessed. I was reading Bertrand Russell to my friends at lunch. But yeah, I told my mom I wanted to be a philosopher, and she was like, "No, if you major in philosophy, your only career option is to be a professor. That's the only choice." And then I went into psychology and became a professor anyway. So maybe I should have just stuck with philosophy. I still enjoy a lot of I connect my psychology work to philosophy. My dissertation was partly inspired by Nietzsche. I just had a paper come out where I look at Schopenhauer's stratagems for shutting down topics that you find morally offensive or you don't like for whatever reason. And right now I'm doing a study looking at the benefits of stoic displays. So like I bring it in a little bit. I like that I have the concrete skills to be able to analyze data that philosophers don't get a lot of training in. But yeah, maybe I should have been a philosopher. Would have gotten more affirmative action benefits for sure.
No, it seems to have worked out for you just fine. So it sounds like the right call, and your mom was very wise to steer you in that direction for sure. Yeah, and some of your work also touches on free will that I saw. So it's obvious that this is also at least one strand within your research as well. So I can see like the marriage of those two things, and I'm still interested in. I would love to know where philosophy fits in. So I'm just kind of following up. It's interesting that there isn't, at least from what you've seen, like clear data on why it's more of like a male dominated field. The abstract thing does make sense to me. But I guess maybe one way of like finding that answer is just polling a lot of people and yeah, finding out like
One
what the appeal is.
Now that we're talking about it, I can think of two other reasons. One is I feel like philosophers are like quite argumentative, and they're kind of like rude to each other in a way that's not tolerated in other disciplines. That could be partly because there aren't women there, but that also could be a deterrent for women, as they don't like that kind of argumentative culture that much. And then another thing is, in philosophy, a lot of what you do is entertain really absurd and even morally reprehensible positions and feel like, hey, why don't we like this? Maybe this is okay. And that's another thing that women might be a little bit turned off by. They're less interested in thinking about and debating like potentially harmful ideas, even if it is kind of in this abstract sense. Like, no one's endorsing this, but let's explore why we think this is wrong. That might be something that women would be less interested in too.
That does seem to make sense. Maybe another factor, and that's closely related, is that in philosophy, at least when you start out, there is this sense where you are trying to discover what the world is like, not in a physics way, but you're trying to get at the truth of things by way of argument, and not like in a disagreement way, but like through premises and a conclusion. And I mean, could that be maybe more associated with like male preferences than female preferences?
You mean like
The search for truth.
um yeah, so that one I've looked at a little bit. I think women are interested in truth. However, they also have other things that are important to them that are less important to men. So for example, in my studies with psychology professors, I had a question that was something like, yeah, if pursuit of truth and equity came into conflict, which should scholars prioritize? And the majority of men say truth. And the majority of women say it's complicated. And I don't know that it's necessarily women aren't interested in truth so much as they're more interested in equity and helping people and, you know, minimizing harm. And because that's a more important priority to women than to men, that interferes with the pursuit of truth for them more than it does for men, who value truth much more than they do these other moral goals.
Okay, interesting. I also want to bring up, I saw this statistic. It may have been from your research, but it's something like 40% of psychiatrists are female, but the overwhelming psychologists and counselors are female. So what accounts for that difference? It's sort of the same field in a way,
Mm-hmm.
but so what's the story going on there?
Yeah, I think there first, I will say with psychiatry, although I think it is currently women are not a majority, I think probably one day they will be the majority as they come to earn most medical degrees. So I think part of that is just, you know, to be a psychiatrist, you have to go to med school. Whereas to be a counselor, you don't have to do that. But I also think there's something with psychiatry that's a little bit colder. You're treating the person more as like an organism and they prescribe medicine. Whereas with a lot of counselors, what they offer is like talk therapy. So, you know, making those personal connections with the person, and you feel like you're offering your care to them, not a pill. You're offering your emotional support. And that's something that women really like to do, is to care for people who are struggling, and especially caring for people who are struggling like psychologically or emotionally. So it makes sense that that would be majority female. I think with psychiatry, it will head that direction eventually. Maybe not ever as extreme, though, as like the kinds of people who offer talk therapy.
Interesting. Um, I wanted to ask, have you done any sort of dive into, we talked about the faculty level and degrees, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on higher ed administration,
Mm.
the sex differences there, because, I mean, as you know, being in higher ed, a whole lot of the differences, not differences, a whole lot of the decisions and directions of an institution can are typically at like the administrative level, not so much the faculty level. I'm sure there are exceptions, but how has I'll give you like, are there notable sex differences there in terms of percentages? And second, how has that been affected by the recent changes in the past couple decades?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's a statistic I should look up if it's available. I do know that women are growing numbers of college and university presidents. That's just one person in a university, though. When it comes to broader administration, I would all but guarantee those numbers are increasing. I mean, virtually everywhere you look, numbers are increasingly female, but I would all but guarantee in administration, those numbers are increasingly female. Are they majority female? My guess would be yes. I don't know for sure. So if somebody has studied that, which it seems like somebody must have, I'm not familiar with the data. But yeah, it does seem like that's also the majority female, and a lot of these policy issues, like the addition of, like, should we ban, like, for example, what was that Stanford panel of whatever that like banned like over 100 words from use at the university, including very like cakewalk, I think was where you can't say the word cakewalk. I assume that was some kind of administrative panel. I assume it was majority female. Someone can fact check me on that, and see if or rather just see if my hypothesis is correct. But yeah, things like that, like banning words on campus, adding trigger warnings to syllabi, especially if they're on potentially controversial topics, the addition of these anonymous reporting systems where if anybody in the university reports anybody for anything, they will launch a full-blown investigation into it, even if there's no evidence forwarded for that accusation. Those kinds of things tend to come from the administration, although they might be motivated in part by like requests from the students and the faculty. Yeah, and I would think that they tend to be implemented more by women because, again, women, one really powerful motivation for them is protecting vulnerable people, and those policies are all seen as a kind of protection, including the banning of the words, which I think the words caused such a like kerfuffle online that they overturned them in like days. So they're like, we spent a year creating this list of words to ban, and then like 2 days later, they're like, okay, we're not going to do that, because yeah, it was extreme.
Yeah. Okay. And so one of my questions was, when we're talking about harms, let's say, can have you drilled in on, I mean, that can mean a lot of things,
Yeah.
right? And so typically when there is this emphasis on preventing harms, what does that exactly look like, number one? And number two, um, this question is not well formed right now, but I'm just going like, is there data out there that suggests that many people are being harmed if the preventions weren't in place? Like, how does that work? So that's a kind of a two-parter, is like, can we get a little bit more specific on this harm question? What do they mean by that?
Yeah, that is difficult because harm means very different things to very different people, and their thresholds for like, yeah, both what constitutes harm are different, and then like how big of a deal is it even if people are harmed in the first place. So one thing that's been happening, and this is kind of, I think most of the focus has been in the Nature Springer family of journals because many of their journals have launched these new editorial policies. The one of the ones that caused the most controversy was this one where it said they would reject or retract papers that have potential to that are perceived by the editor or the reviewers as having potential to undermine the dignity of human social groups. And there's a lot going on there. One is it's seen by the editors or the reviewers. Okay, well, are these people qualified to predict the future outcomes of the dissemination of scientific findings? And I would say almost certainly not, because almost nobody is qualified. Like almost nobody can predict the future, especially on something complicated. Like if this information leaks out into the world, who's going to do what? And then how are we going to react to that? And of course, like if somebody tried to, I think they've even given examples like, papers advocating for, some places not having democracy. And it's like, well, who's going to stop a country from having a democracy? Like, who has the power to do that? But anyway, so yeah, and then it's like, what is undermining the dignity? What does that mean? And then it has potential to. What is potential? Like, what percentage certainty do we have to have that something bad's going to happen to call this a potential harm? Anyway, yeah, so there have been the addition of these harm policies, and specifically saying that we might reject or retract papers because of the potential for this information to cause harm out in the world, without specifying exactly, concretely, what is that harm? How likely does it have to be? And who is this authority who knows that this harm is likely to happen? What I see in my own research is very little support for those kinds of policies, that most people think, the job of science is to pursue the truth. It's not to make these kinds of moral predictions about the world and then to interfere with the truth based on our predictions. But we do see that women have a lower threshold. So women are more willing to suppress potentially true information if it has potential to cause harm. What do they mean by harm? I assume they mean slightly different things. I think probably men, when they think of harm, they think a little bit more like concrete, somebody's bleeding kind of harm, like people are losing limbs. Whereas with women, they're likely more thinking of emotional and psychological harm. And I will say some people go a little bit too far in their criticism of these policies and say, oh, it's just about offending people. And I don't think that's what people mean. I don't think people who support these policies mean, oh, we shouldn't offend people. I think they mean that some information can be like so deeply offensive, or so like, I guess, like psychologically traumatic, that it could cause concrete problems, or it could cause people to engage in genuinely harmful behavior, like write a manifesto and go out and commit a mass shooting kind of harm. Like, and I think everyone would agree that is a real harm. I do think we probably have strong disagreements over how likely is that to actually happen, because some scientific paper was published. I don't think I really answered your question, but yeah, it's a complicated one. I think people define it different ways. People have different thresholds. And so even when we try to talk about these policies, we're often not even talking about the same thing.
Part of the reason I ask is I'm thinking of what is going on with men today, and like speaking as one of them. And there's a lot in the research that you're doing, and
I
somebody
just ruled
like
on myself.
no,
Sorry.
no worries. Good.
I'm okay.
Yeah, I can't even tell actually.
Okay.
People like, I mean, obvious, like Richard Reeves, the kinds of things that like Scott Galloway is talking about, even somebody like Carol Hooven. I'm thinking of a lot of different people. And if you follow the research right now and you're a man, it's not looking great right now. It's not looking great in terms of like where the trends are going. And it's also not looking great in terms of whether anyone cares. And it may be that second part sort of harms or hurts. I don't even like those terms when it's like squishy and you don't know what you're talking about. But I'll just mention that like that's part of behind this question is like who harms for whom, and like what exactly are we talking about? And right now I can tell you from the inside, when I'm observing these sorts of trends, it doesn't feel great that men are losing in so many different areas, number one, and number two, that not a lot of people care.
Yeah.
But in your research, like it seems like that there's a sense in which that makes sense because of people's preferences for
Mm-hmm.
women over men. Is that right?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of research on this. People care more about women than they do about men. I mean, that's pretty clear. Even if you look throughout history, men have always been expected to put their lives on the line to protect women and children. But it's also, we see it in research, including like pretty abstract things. So Steve Stewart Williams has a bunch of studies looking at scientific findings that report sex differences. And if the sex difference makes men look better than women, people are more likely to say it's sexist, it's crap, it should be rejected, retracted, this isn't legitimate science. But if you just take the exact same scientific study and flip the results so that women look better than men, people are like, cool, great study. Totally goes along with what my expectations are. Women are better than men. There's an effect called the women are wonderful effect. People just like women more than they like men. They care more about women than they do about men. And so, yeah, the result of this is that when women are not doing well, everybody cares and they want to have these interventions, get women into these areas. There's a paper by, I think the first author is Katrina Block, maybe Alyssa Block is the last name. Looking at if women or men are underrepresented in desirable careers. If women are underrepresented, people want to intervene. If men are, people don't really care. And you see the same thing happening in academia. Men are getting underrepresented. Basically, nobody cares, but we're all full steam ahead. Make sure physics professors are 50% women. Make sure philosophy professors are 50%. Make sure, and if it goes over 50%, if it's 60, 70, 80% women, all the better. Good. There was that really great tweet from UN Women a few years ago, and I'm going to get the precise details wrong, but it was something along the lines of 11% of reporters killed in, war-torn countries are women. And then it had like the clapping hands and it was like, stop killing female reporters or journalists. But it's like, well, if it's 11% women, that means it's 89% men. And you chose to say that killing the 11% of women was a problem, but killing 89% of men, not even worth talking about. And so, yeah, I do think men see that. They see that societies don't like them and don't support them. And in academia, they see that not only does nobody really care about how they're doing, but there's kind of a hostility to male interests. And you're allowed to say things about men that you're not allowed to say about women. And so, yeah, to me, it's not all that surprising that there is a backlash that has been happening because men really aren't all that welcome in academia. They're not welcome in progressive circles. And yeah, so if you tell them that we hate you, where are they going to go? They're going to go to the other side. And so I think that's what we've been seeing a little bit.
And you're seeing the same sort of thing, not just in academia, but also in the private, like job market sector. Is that correct?
Do you mean like in terms of hiring?
Hiring, yeah, applications, even, and this is, I have both academia and the job market in mind, but men just sort of retreating and
Yeah.
not being as involved, maybe as you'd expect.
Yeah, I think in academia, you definitely have men retreating. That's part of the reason that women increasingly, their numbers continue to grow because men don't want to be around there anymore because it is kind of a hostile place to them. In terms of like other employers, I'm like a very low level co author on a meta analysis that came out a couple of years ago, led by Michael Scherer, where we looked at gender bias and hiring over time in these like audit studies where the scholars are submitting identical resumes to real jobs with male or female names and looking at callback rates. And it was the case that like 30, 40 years ago, employers were discriminating against women, but that mostly went away around like, I think about 10, 20 years ago. And then in the past 10 or so years, employers favor women. And I think part of that is we became aware that there was sex discrimination against women and everybody cared and everyone thought it was a huge problem. And so society got together and like, let's stop doing that. And we stopped doing it. But now that men are getting disfavored, basically nobody cares. And so, yeah, part of that is like, why would men try when their skills aren't valued? And even if they work really hard and they're super productive and talented, they still don't get the jobs. Like, that would be very discouraging. And some of that is happening. So, yeah, it's not so surprising to me that, people are like, why are, like, what's happening with young men? Why do they have all these problems? Why are they so angry? And I'm not saying all of that is justified, but it isn't surprising, because, yeah, it's weird that men hang around in environments where there's quite a bit of hostility directed toward them.
This is going to sound like a weird question. I ask it in a friendly way, but
Okay.
I can imagine someone doing the same sorts of research that you're doing, and let's say not having altruistic motivations,
Hmm.
because there's this cumulative case that you could make that just says, look at all these metrics, like all the most important metric, or let's say most of the most important metrics, women are killing it and men are not, and the trends are going in that direction.
Hmm.
Isn't it obvious that women are just more capable than men, et cetera? So I'm wondering, like,
Hmm.
I could see the data and the research in the hands of someone who has that sort of perspective.
Hmm.
And I guess I'm wondering, like, is like behind what I'm seeing, is there sort of an altruistic, like, we need to help men, or like, how, what do you do with this research? Or are you just putting it out there and you're going, I don't really have many sort of like practical steps. I just want to present you with them, or like, how do you understand that?
Yeah, my personal primary interest is in just like documenting what is happening. I like care about my ability to say what is true, but I also care about other people's ability to say what is true. So to the extent that there is any kind of like activist flair to my work, it's just like, let's talk about stuff. Like, I want us to be able to talk about the stuff. um, so, yeah, that's not to say I don't care about men or that I don't care about women. That's just not really like what motivates my research. But to your question about some people saying, well, isn't it just women are better? That is certainly a narrative that's out there, and it's not like entirely wrong in some ways. Women do better in schooling and also in higher education. I think because they're more conscientious to a degree, they're a little bit more agreeable. They can kind of like sit and take instruction better than men can. And women are like basically as good as men in any of these intellectual disputes. If you look at like average differences, they're not particularly large. They vary a little bit depending on what domain you're looking in. So there's some of that. I do think the numbers are so dramatic that that's not all it is. Like, men are very talented too. And so the fact that they're not going into higher education anymore, and in also getting like more advanced degrees anymore, does suggest that there's some kind of social force that might be preventing them from going into those areas. And then, I also worry about like the broader consequences. Like, for example, if men continue to not pursue college degrees, or higher education or advanced degrees, one thing we know is that women tend to prefer to partner with men who are actually more educated and more successful and have more money than they do. And if it ends up being the case that women are vastly more successful than men, which I think that's the direction things are headed, and it's already happening in some places, women are more successful and wealthier than men. There's not going to be it's going to be hard for people to partner up. Men and women aren't going to get married as much, and that's already kind of happening. And they're not going to have children as much, and that's already kind of happening, because women are more successful than men, and they don't want to marry men that are less successful than they are. So there are like broader societal consequences that could be a pretty big problem. That I think there's some signs that are already happening, and that those could get even larger in the future, and then they could be huge problems. Those are all things worth considering. But these are all really complicated, like lots of moving variables. And I also have like a little bit of confidence in like human society's ability to fix problems when they're noticed, which is why I'm supportive of like, let's talk about them. Because if we can't, if there is a problem happening, we need to be able to talk about it first before we can come up with solutions. So yeah, again, I don't think, did I answer your question at
Yeah,
all?
no, I really think, yeah. And I'm an optimist too. But it is something that I think about quite a bit,
I
which
wouldn't say I'm
is
an optimist. I would say I'm not a pessimist.
okay. Okay. Good. So I'll be alone in that. I'm the
Okay,
optimist
okay.
here in the room, and you're going to be more the, like the realist, if that's a contrast. But I mean, so yes, to your point, yeah, what we're seeing in academia, that's one thing, but also like the question is, okay, so where are they going, or where can they go?
Hmm.
And maybe the most obvious answer is something like a trade school or something like that.
Hmm.
But even there, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like I'm seeing maybe one way to put it is something like, okay, if one of a man's most valuable traits is like sort of strength and hard facts or whatever it is, that seems to be going away as well. I can imagine a future that, let's say, AI is implemented more and more sort of like jobs that rely on physical strength and that sort of
Mm.
thing are being replaced. And so I'm going, okay, so you have, the more academic-y jobs that are out there. That's going to go more towards women, and the more physical jobs, that's going to go more towards machines and AI.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I can't see a sector, even though I have sort of an optimistic spirit in me. But and so I'm looking to you for help. You tell me, like, what sector do you think men are going to need to go into, or do we need to throttle something back, or like, how do you see this going?
Hmm. Yeah, first I'll say again, people are really bad at predicting the future, including myself. So I don't have like any, I don't want to say I have any great insight into what people should be doing in consideration of the future. But one thing that I've wondered is, I think something that's been happening in higher education is that it's becoming more like a high school than a university, in that it's, we want to protect students from some ideas. We're not like giving them the cold hard truth about things. We're not requiring them to debate things, to fail, to be uncomfortable, to show up even when they don't feel like it. Like, it's a fairly like soft place now, let's say, maybe more so than it used to be, which makes me think that there is a market or room for the hard, real world. Um, and I wonder if this is going to be like what the tech industry does. Like, we don't even need to hire people who went to college, because people are teaching themselves how to code and work with AI. And those are the skills we're looking for. We're looking for people who can self teach and work with technology to improve their own skills and be more productive, which is not really what we're doing in universities anymore. Um, and so maybe what we'll get is that the university kind of becomes this like next step of education and like the K through 12 pipeline. Then you go to college, but you're not really like getting a whole lot of job preparation there. You're getting job preparation if you do an advanced degree, you go to med school, you go to law school, and you're learning actual skills you need. Or you can go straight into industry, go work in the tech industry. And if places like Google and Apple and Facebook are not hiring people because they have a bachelor's degree from Harvard, but because they spent years teaching themselves how to be good programmers, or I don't know anything about tech. Like, I don't know the language. But if they hire those people, then I see that as a path for men, the kind of like self-teaching skills path that can go into those kinds of jobs that are less desirable to women anyway. um, so that might be an option. In terms of like the physical labor skills, I don't know, some of those things will probably continue to be around for a while. But I don't know, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, and I can think of, so one thing that we haven't talked about, and I don't think this is in the center of your research, but just the um, let's say much of life is going on screens, not in person.
Mm-hmm.
And my guess is, so again, I don't have like the research and the data that you might, but screens are image based, and it seems like women do better, both as consumers, but also as sort of the the what is consumed, let's say, on social media, Instagram, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that trend is going to follow the same sort of line of what we've been talking about in academia and the job market.
Um, yeah, that's a good. I don't really know. Do you think that a lot of young people are earning a living like via Instagram?
It
I'm sure
seems
a
to me
lot of
that a lot
people
of
are,
people
but
want
not a
to.
lot of not a high percentage of people.
Yeah, it seems to me that the interest, well, I can't remember, but I have seen that there's data that says like the interest in being an influencer, creator, that sort of thing is just going like
Oh
that for
yeah,
sure.
but I think that's
Um,
like everybody always wanted to be like a Hollywood actor,
yeah,
like
yeah,
people did. The people who get those jobs usually are extremely attractive. They're good-looking people, both the men and the women.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I know people want to be influencers, but I just that market is like pretty saturated, and I think it's like it's like smaller scale in a sense that it's like more people are famous, but they're within their own little niche market. So maybe more people will be like kind of famous that way. And of course, you have an issue where like everybody's a brand now, right? Um, in academia, that's certainly true. A lot of people do just go teach their classes, do the research. They don't want to be famous, but a lot of people are, like they have podcasts. I had a podcast for a minute. They write blogs. They pick up followers on Twitter. So that's kind of a weird world, where I'm sure being attractive helps, or being a woman, especially an attractive woman, helps, um, but not as much as in Hollywood, right? Like it's also people who have interesting things to say, and also people who are like good political warriors are the ones that succeed in that environment, it seems. But yeah, I just don't know. All of those markets are so saturated. Same with podcasts and Substack. Everybody's got a Substack. So yeah, I don't know how like I don't know if it's like a good advice to tell people to go into that, um, as a profession.
I think that's right. Yeah, I'm with you on that for sure. I want to step back just a little bit, and because it occurred to me, what I've been surprised in some of the like, let's say, interviews, or let's say the debate that I saw at MIT, was that even just mentioning sex traits, sex differences, sometimes gets pushback.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that, not just you, obviously, like anyone, if you
Yeah.
say something like married women are happier than like single, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
people go, hey, hold on a second. Like and there's an individual case that I know of that. And so I'm wondering, like, what are people's, let's say, um, what are people's main oppositions to talking about sex traits in a general way? And how do you approach having to give lessons in sort of statistics 101 to people who may not understand exactly like what you mean when you're talking about these sort of general differences?
Yeah, so there's sex differences. Men and women differ on average in a lot of different ways. When you talk about it, and people who get really nervous about it, they'll tell you, we're talking about overlapping bell curves. If I can tell you the amount of times I've heard people say, overlapping bell curves, overlapping bell curves. It's true. When you say men are more X, you don't mean all men are that way and no women are that way. You mean men are a little bit more likely to be that way. Tons of women have more masculine traits, tons of men have more feminine traits. But the other important thing is that sex differences are all correlated. Women are a little bit more A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Like if you go down the list of traits, they're all going to be correlated. So when you're looking at one specific thing, like the example that a lot of people give is you look at noses. Like if you just looked at my nose and your nose and you asked people like which nose is a male or female, people might not be that good at it. But if you showed our full faces, probably 100% of people would get it. And the same is true with psychological sex differences. You look at one trait, like for example, I talk about preference for egalitarianism versus like comfort with like hierarchy. Men are higher than that in comfort with hierarchy. Women are more, they have a stronger preference for egalitarianism. If you just looked at that, you're not going to know much about whether someone's a man or woman. But if you look at the full suite of psychological differences, you can see like more feminine kind of personality types and more masculine types, personality types. In psychology, and I know this only because I asked this question in a recent paper of mine looking at psychology professors, most psychology professors agree that men and women have different psychological characteristics because they face different evolutionary pressures. Big one being women had to be phenomenal mothers. They had to care for their children and keep their children alive. Men didn't do that so much. They needed to gain access to women. So men are motivated to find ways to attract women and get access to women. Women are motivated to find ways to care for their children. If men and women had no behavioral or no psychological differences, it would make no freaking sense, like from that perspective. It just doesn't make sense. And if you look at other animals, you see behavioral differences between male and female, like chimpanzees and bonobos, for example. So, and not even just primates. If you look at other animals, there are sex differences in their behavior, which means there are sex differences in psychology because that's where the behavior comes from. So it's not so controversial that those differences exist. Some people say they don't. It's not 100% of psychology professors agree that they exist, and women are actually more likely to say they don't exist than men. Women more than men favor more socialization explanation. So the idea that men and women are born, or rather little boys and girls are born virtually exactly the same, but it's because parents and the media and teachers encourage women play with the baby doll, and they tell the boys play with the trucks and the guns. I think once people have children, they realize that little boys and girls are actually very different. But yeah, some number of psychologists would say that there aren't these differences. Most would say they are, and so I don't think it's all that controversial. However, some people get really upset about the suggestion that men and women are different. And I think it's because they're afraid that if you admit that men and women are different, then you're kind of admitting it's okay for there to be some inequalities in some places. And so I think that's the fear. The fear is if we say women are more nurturing, then, oh no, that you're saying that women have to be the one to do all the childcare, do all the housework, or take care of their aging parents. You're like burdening women with this extra responsibility to be the caregiver. But it's like, well, one, we don't have to go there if we don't want to go there. Like nothing is required of us. But two, it's like, no, this is just a fact. Like this is just true about women. Do with that information what you want to do. But yeah, you can get a lot of a colleague of mine, Steve Cece, is a professor at Cornell. He and his wife, Wendy Williams, also a professor at Cornell. I think they're working on a paper looking at this, scholars who study sex differences and the social costs that they have paid. And it is true, like a lot of scholars who study sex differences have been harassed and threatened and called really terrible names because it's, even though I think most people know it's true, it's still like controversial to acknowledge and talk about. And especially in any way where it looks like women have like the less desirable characteristic and men have the more desirable. Like you can't even talk about the fact that men are faster and stronger than women, even though it's clear as day. I think I mentioned this when I was on the Chris Williamson podcast, but I had done a Google search where I Googled men are stronger. I was looking for a picture for a slide that I was working on, and I Googled men are stronger than women. And like 90 to 95% of the pictures that popped up on Google Images were women stronger than men. Like women holding a man overhead, running faster than a man, beating a man in arm wrestling. And so even you take this fact, literally everybody knows men are stronger than women. But if you actually look up that content, you're going to get a lot of content about how women are stronger than men. Again, and it all comes back to this: we care more about women. We don't care as much about men. We want women to be better than men. And we're more bothered by any suggestion that women might not be as good as men at one thing. And so I think that's where the little bit of a moral panic comes from when we're talking about these differences.
And that's the case for both men and women, right? Like men root for women more than they do for men, and women like maybe not by the same percentage, but is there's the breakdown there, right?
So I've conducted studies in this area myself, and I'm familiar with a lot of others. The effects are, I would say, not super consistent. The overall pattern is that women are more pro women than men are, but men are also a little bit pro woman. So if you look at, for example, the studies looking at reporting sex differences, like studies that say men are more intelligent than women, or women are more intelligent than men. Everybody's biased in favor of the women are more intelligent than men, but women more so than men are. But yeah, so men are even a teeny bit biased in favor of women. Women are very biased in favor of women.
That's so interesting. So I want to maybe close with talking about a couple of the recent papers that have just come out that you were involved in. The one in the Journal of Controversial Ideas. I'd love just sort of like a summary so that if people are interested, they can go to and read that paper. And then the second one that I just saw was about victimhood,
Mm.
and so maybe I'll take those in turns. And I know you weren't first author on the second one, but it was really interesting, I thought. So maybe the one on in the Journal of Controversial Ideas, that was fascinating.
Yeah, that one was something I've been thinking about for a very long time, and kind of punting and not writing the paper that I knew needed to be written. And then eventually I did it. And I only actually did it because I gave a talk at the censorship conference, and there were like conference proceedings, and I was like, I guess this is my opportunity to put it down on paper. But yeah, it's just looking at the paper's called like From Warriors to Warriors: The Cultural Rise of Women. This is using Joyce Bennenson's framework, where she talks. It's a great book, Warriors. I forget if it's Warriors and Warriors or vice versa, but talks about why men and women evolved different psychological tendencies, the different evolutionary pressures they faced. And it's looking at how women who are the warriors of evolution have become warriors for social justice in institutions. So it's looking at how many important institutions, including academia, but also politics, journalism, any area that has intellectual, cultural influence, women's numbers have been growing. And then looking at the cultural changes that have happened as their numbers have grown, focusing on three primary differences between men and women. One being men are more meritocratic and hierarchical, and women are more egalitarian. So men are more comfortable with the fact that some people are better at certain things than others, and those people are going to do better, and they're going to be leaders, and they're going to have more than other people. Whereas women are more desirous of everybody having the same, being equally successful, having the same things, regardless of their potential merits. So that's a big one. Harm aversion. So women are more risk averse and harm averse, and that's how you get a lot of these protective policies and institutions, the trigger warning kind of thing, the whole kind of concern underlying, the coddling of the American mind, safetyism, that kind of thing, like wanting to protect people from any potential suffering. That is a more feminine concern. And then, the third one was ostracism. So men are more comfortable with direct conflict. If they get in a fight with someone, they'll just get in a fight with the person. They'll call them names and yell at each other. When women have conflicts, because they're self-protective and they're concerned about harm and avoiding risks, their conflict like resolution strategy is just to cut that person out of their social world altogether. They ostracize and socially isolate people. And that's what we see in cancel culture is, if you screw up, you do something I don't like, I don't just call you a jerk and move on with my life. I say, you shouldn't have a job. You shouldn't be allowed in polite society. You shouldn't be able to be on Twitter. You should be shut off forever. You're done. Your life is over. Like, that's a more feminine strategy because it's about removing the threat from the social world. You're no longer part of my social orbit. So yeah, it looks at those, provide a lot of data on the fact that these changes have happened and that they align both with men and women's sort of evolved psychology, but also modern men and women's stated preferences for what they want in institutions, where women are more supportive of, for example, and this is in my study with psychology professors, if a professor publishes something that portrays, or I think we look at like biological explanations for group differences, something like that. But anyway, put an offensive scientific finding. Women are more supportive of that person getting fired, of calling them names, of ostracizing them, kicking them out of leadership positions, calling them names on social media, all those kinds of things. And I don't, when I say women are more supportive of that, I don't mean most women are supportive of that. They're not. It's just that women are more supportive compared to men. And so it kind of makes sense that as women's numbers have doubled, tripled, quadrupled, quintupled, you see growing support for that response. If somebody does something we don't like, we don't just scold them, chastise them, punish them, and let them continue on their job. We say you're done forever, which is, a more female oriented strategy. Anyway, people can check the paper out if they're interested.
It's great. There's a lot more in the paper, obviously. Maybe one way to ask about the paper on victims is, and I don't know if I'm stretching things, but I saw sort of a parallel with the following narrative about victims and also institutions who are sort of like intentionally politicized, and that is that so you present yourself as a victim, you present yourself as an institution that's like politicized in some way, and maybe there will be like these short-term kind of public gains in a way, but maybe long-term costs, reputational costs. So I'm wondering, is that right? And what's going on in the paper on victimhood that I just saw?
Are you talking also about my other paper on politicization and trust in institutions?
Yeah, with institutions. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but that is actually a really interesting potential connection. So the one with victimhood, to me, it's a really fascinating topic because there have been a handful of papers published over the past 5 or so years looking at victimhood. And what you see is two things. One is you see that people who signal their victimhood to others, people who talk about all the misfortunes they've suffered, they tend to have like undesirable personality traits. They tend to be high in dark triad traits. So narcissism, Machiavellianism, that's like a willingness to manipulate and take advantage of other people for your own personal gain. They're higher in that. And then all these other things, they feel more entitled to get revenge against other people. They think they deserve more than other people. They think they're morally superior to other people. They hold grudges longer. Kind of, like pretty much if you look across anything, they have more undesirable characteristics. So that's part one. But part two is that people who signal victimhood are rewarded. And that's what's puzzling. So people who are signal their victimhood, they get more resources. So if you say, I have this really hard upbringing, I'll be more likely to give you money for whatever. You ask me for some money, I'll give you some money. But also, we let them get away with things. So when they harm other people, we're more likely to excuse their bad behavior. When they have there's a paper looking at this, like political positions. If you assert your political position and you say, the reason I have this is because I had this hard upbringing, I'm more willing to say, okay, yeah, and kind of go along with what you're saying. So people are deferring to these people, giving them status. So to me, this looks like a third route to status. And by third, I mean there are two other that scholars talk about, which are dominance and prestige. This is distinct from that. It's signaling victimhood. Tell people you're a victim, you've suffered, you've been treated unfairly, and people will defer to you and give you things. But the people who do this are people who are generally antisocial people. And so we're treating these people as though they're pro-social people, but they're potentially antisocial people, which to me was what's so interesting about it. In this new paper, what we find, which I think makes sense of that kind of interesting pattern, is that people actually do make negative judgments about victims. So I might give you money, but I think you're a worse person. I might go along with what you're saying and not challenge you, but I think you're a worse person. I don't want to hang out with you again. And so I think we can think of it in terms of people who might come up to us and like ask us for money on the street. We'll give them like money, but we're not necessarily like, hey, let's also be best friends. You want to go hang out? Let's go play basketball. That's not to say nobody would do that, but because people tend to want to be friends with and affiliate people who have these reciprocal relationships, I'll give you something, you give me something in return. That's how you establish like a trusting friendship between people. Whereas with the victim signaling, what you have is these requests for non-reciprocal resource transfers. I want you to give me something. I want you to listen to me. I'm not going to listen to you. I want you to go along with what I want to do. I'm not going to go along with what you want to do. And you might do that, but you don't want to hang out with me again. And that's what I think we're seeing with the victim signaling is we give these people status, but they are paying a social price. And so I'm looking at some follow-up research because I want to like look at, well, why do people take that? Like who takes that approach to status? And does it make sense that some people would take that approach where you're like, I'll take the power, even though I'm going to damage my social reputation and people aren't going to like me as much. Yeah. So I was like the third or the fourth author on that paper, but I think it's really cool. And I'm going to do more follow-up work on it because I think it doesn't get studied nearly as much as it should, given what I think is a really interesting sort of social dilemma.
That sounds right. So on that topic, what do you have that you're working on that we could look out for in the next while?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Anything that's like coming out soon? Maybe. I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah, you're putting me in the spot because I have like 40 projects and I don't know which ones are going to be interesting.
Maybe a better way to ask it is like, is there just even a general topic that right now you haven't done as much on, but is really getting you excited and you want to work more on?
Yeah, that's another one. I have like a lot, but also no at the same time. Some of these I like have collaborators and I don't want to like spill the beans on things that like I didn't get permission from them to talk about. But no, I've got nothing. I've got a lot and nothing going on at the same time. You can check
Understandable. I
out
mean,
my
I
cognitive
mentioned before
chicanery paper is a fun one, but that one's already published. It came out like a month or two ago.
I don't know if I saw that.
Oh, this is my
Is
one.
that on your website?
Maybe not. It might not be.
Okay.
But it's just kind of looking at like the sort of mental shenanigans people engage in when they are morally offended by scientific findings. So like we have a concept motivated postmodernism. They're more likely to say this isn't even an empirical question to start with. Motivated confusion. I can't read this sentence. It's incomprehensible. And then we have one of my favorite is we have these like contradictory statements. So people will say like the sample size is too small, but also anecdotes. This problem's better understood by talking to a few people. So you're saying like sample size not big enough, but also it would be better if it was smaller sample size and you just talk to a couple people about this problem. So that was a really fun one for me.
Oh, that's super cool. Yeah, I'll need to check if it's on your road. So on that point,
It might not be.
Dr. Cory Clark, your research is fascinating. I love it. Can you point people in the right direction where they can find a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about and stuff that you're going to be producing in the future?
Yeah, I have a website, which I think is just coryjclark.com. I have some papers posted on there. I link to my ResearchGate profile, which is where I tend to keep things up to date if I can, if I'm not banned by the publishers from posting stuff there, which sometimes that happens. But yeah, that's probably like where I post the most up to date stuff. And then I have a Twitter too. I'm hardcore that I try not to use almost ever because it's a terrifying place, but I'm there sometimes.
Yeah, and I appreciate when you're on there. I think that's the first time that I heard about like your most recent papers. So at least from my perspective, I like when you tell us what's going on and what you're working
I
on.
post a
I
paper and
really
then I avoid
appreciate the
it for
time
like
today.
a week, and like I don't need to know what the people are saying.
Yeah, well, you're using it smarter than I am, I'm sure. I mean, I'm on there a little bit, not all that much, but I like hearing about what you're working on,
It definitely
and
makes
there's
me
so much
like
more that we
people
can be.
less.
Well, I mean the okay, so um obviously we don't have time to talk about it, but I have always wanted to get into the research on the disparity between online presence and
Oh,
like in-person
yeah.
presence. I'm sure that's a major field in psychology, but I just haven't seen anything on it. And obviously from people's real world experiences, like we see that all the time. This is an
Yeah.
obvious thing, but I'd love to like read some papers on that.
Yeah, I think one big thing is that, what goes viral is the go viral. And so when you go on there, you're being disproportionately exposed to that. Whereas out in the real world, there aren't that many. Um, and they're not like going to be the most prominent, like the people you notice in your social environment is whoever's around. There is not this like elevation of people who say the most shocking and the nastiest thing. So yeah, when I'm on there, I'm like, what is wrong with people? But then, you walk through your neighborhood and you're like, oh, everyone's so nice, this is great.
No, totally right. I mean, when I go on there, and I say this sometimes, like, hey, can you all maybe share things that are not, it doesn't even need to be positive. It's just not negative.
Yeah.
Because it seems like most people just sort of, they're the lemmings following everybody else. And it's like, what other bad news? Okay, they're sharing bad news. What's my bad
Mm,
news? Because this is getting traction. And I know there are studies that show that, yeah, it's the negative stuff that just goes viral.
yeah.
So
Jay Van
yeah, that's the
Bavel
pattern.
and some of his colleagues, yeah, they look at virality, and yeah, it's just the negative, emotional, angry stuff. And so yeah, we're like volunteering, we're like voluntarily exposing ourselves to the worst of humanity every time we get on there.
Yes. Maybe in a more positive direction. So one of these days, we didn't have time to get to it, but oh, I would love to talk to you at some point about just when we're talking about ethics and morality. That's just, I mean, there's a lot going on with what you do. And I'm just so interested as someone who teaches ethics and that sort of thing and dives deep into like the contours. Like, there's a lot that we could talk about. And it seems like it's taken for granted that there's morality behind these things. And a lot more to say on that. I know you had another discussion on sort of like consequentialism versus duty when it comes to pursuing like truth
Mm.
versus preventing harms and that sort of thing. So anyway, all that is that's more for me than you. So I took more of your time than I wanted, but I appreciate you coming on and love your research. So thanks for doing what you do.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.